Today's gathering is, in many ways, as we see here, a type of family reunion. But it's also a family reunion with a great purpose, and that is to, in many ways, reconnect with each other and learn about our practical positions, how we are governed, and how we can really work together across our region on a pragmatic basis. By examining together the value and importance of local government, we will not only see how it is the best suited form of government to advance social and economic well-being, but we will also witness how our local governments in the Paso del Norte region, more than any other local governments in the US and Mexico, hold the keys to a healthy, secure, and prosperous future, not only for us, but for both countries. Now, in beginning our examination of local government, it must be noted that cities and counties exist for the sake of living well, for the well-being and happiness of our citizens and constituents. In his treatise on government, for example, Aristotle states that the virtue and happiness of the citizens is the highest good of all, and that it is precisely the purpose of the city to make the attainment of this virtue and happiness possible. Well, how is this? How does local government, how does city government, how does county government help ensure the happiness and well-being of its citizens? The city government and local government are closest to its citizens. The local governments provide for the conditions and services essential to the survival and flourishing of their citizens. Local governments provide for public safety, public health, education, roads and transportation networks. Local governments have a critical role to play as well in the provision of utilities, water, electricity, and gas, things we certainly could not live without, much less generate a thriving economic system. At the same time, local governments do so at a scale and at a reach that is closer and more responsive to its citizens than any other type of government. I know it feels like no one will pick up the phone at City Hall, especially on a Friday, but this does not destroy the proximity between the government and its citizens. In fact, it is the practice of civic engagement at this grassroots level that communities learn about themselves, consider alternatives, and make collective decisions. Our city and county leaders are our neighbors, even our family members. Those of us who have the honor and the privilege to serve in local government, as a policeman, a nurse, an assistant district attorney, a teacher, an administrator, serve not only our institutions, but our neighbors, our families, and our broader communities. Through this interaction between citizen and government at the local level, we engage in the process of learning more deeply about each other, and thereby presented with the opportunity to directly strengthen our social and economic well-being. Because of this intimacy at the local level, the city and county governments provide the fundamental space for the management of challenges and the leveraging of opportunities through mutual understanding and cooperation. Local government teaches us how to learn from each other, how to participate in our own governance, and, as Aristotle mentioned, how to, therefore, achieve our highest virtue and happiness. But what of the case where many local governments with many different structures, norms, practices, and even languages press upon one another and come into contact with each other's citizens? Due to the historical, present, and future value of the trade routes that pass through our region, our families and communities have seen a shifting variety of local government structures over the years. In particular, I remember poignantly the plaza in Mesilla, where it says 1854. And this is just one marker of how, at a certain time, Mesilla was governed by Mexico, and then very abruptly, it was governed by the United States. The Paso del Norte region represents the juncture of the most efficient trade routes between the Pacific and the Atlantic coasts. West of here flows the Gila, whose path, the railroads and interstate trade corridors follow to the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. To the east, trade corridors extend to Chicago and Houston, and the Paso del Norte connects them all, unique amongst any other city in the Americas. As Spain, Mexico, Texas, and the United States, New Mexico, and others have fought to exercise control of these trade routes and therefore this land where we stand, we find ourselves divided between local, state, and national governments all at the same time. This state of affairs, though this divergence, this discord, presents many challenges and difficulties to our communities, but also to our local governments, as we strive to provide for the happiness and social and economic well-being of our citizens. If I live and work throughout the region, whose taxes do I pay? What schools do I attend? Who is responsible for my safety? Who is responsible for the safety of others? Who provides basic services? Even, what language do I speak? These uncertainties, due to these divisions, create limits to the flourishing of the citizens and their local governments. It makes planning more difficult, the efficient use of resources and assets more difficult. It makes communication, trust, infinitely more difficult. Just as the city serves as an intimate platform for different individuals to learn about, trust, and decide together to their happiness, so must the local governments of the Paso del Norte region foster similar mutuality of understanding and collaboration between themselves. Only by knowing our neighbors, our extended family, only by knowing their aspirations, their constraints, and their resources, can we find a way to work together toward common goals, and thereby strengthen the ability of our cities and countries to provide for and enrich our general welfare. This principle, then, the principle that is only by deepening our contact with and understanding of each other, of ourselves in fact, within or across our local governments, that we as citizens flourish, is at the heart of our work at the Hunt Institute and at the heart of what we are doing today. But say that this principle is the result of flawed reasoning. Let us imagine the alternative. What value would we generate if our local governments, both internally and externally, shut themselves off from each other? If division were the rule, rather than unity? What would our communities look like if exclusivity and closure prevailed? If our businesses, roads, schools, and opportunities were closed off to one another? In such a scenario, I can see citizens from one community subject to prejudice and suspicion in other communities. I can see these governments working at cross purposes without the knowledge of the others, operating in secret. I can see the fluidity of families, ideas, goods dry up and cease to flow. I can see governments yoked together in time and space, yet unable to communicate and manage common threats or to seize upon the sudden appearance of an opportunity. Because such a scenario only leads to greater darkness and greater privation, a never-ending dynamic of rivalry in a resource-scarce environment, the local governments will struggle even more than they do now to realize the happiness and well-being of their citizens. It is therefore necessary that our local governments, but increase contact and knowledge sharing with one another, even more so as the challenges that face us as a whole can only be dealt with by finding a response as a whole. As the data and discussion presented during today's forum will indicate, our region has become the preeminent geostrategic gateway for international commerce, bringing with it all the pressures and the opportunities that it entails. For this reason, not only does the mutual understanding and collaboration between our local governments represent a positive in and of itself, but also with respect to current challenges facing many communities in the United States, Mexico, and across the world. Because our local governments are components of larger political systems, we have the chance here together, bound together on the edge of each state and country, to take the lead on finding a wealth of practically beneficial solutions in order to further our social and economic development between our states and our countries. Many communities are facing challenges of water scarcity, migratory flows, fragile public revenues, competition for skilled labor, public safety, and environmental pressures. By knowing ourselves, by knowing each other, by working together and planning for our shared future, by building on the ties of a shared past, we have the opportunity to safeguard and foster not only the virtue and happiness of all of our citizens of the Paso del Norte region, but also our extended communities across the United States and Mexico. At a later point in the politics, Aristotle remarks that the excellence of a city is due to the excellence of its citizens. As we work as individuals, as communities, and as governments to develop our combined excellence, as we work together to put ourselves in the shoes of the other, to understand one another, we thereby work to secure our familiar family and neighbors, and thereby securing a most bright and prosperous future. Thank you again to all of you for making the effort to be with us today, to engage in a practical but very inspirational discussion about how to work together. I very much look forward to our conversation and our shared journey. Thank you very much.